6 Apache girls left to dying upside down. Until ranchers saw their tattoos, the sun was just beginning to rise over the wide, dusty land. The sky was soft orange and pink, and the air was cool and quiet. Birds were slowly waking up, and a light breeze moved across the tall, dry grass. In the distance, hills stretched far and wide, covered with small bushes and scattered trees. This was a lonely ranch, far from any town, where only a few people lived. A middle-aged rancher named Samuel was already awake. He was a quiet man who spent most of his life working alone. He wore worn boots, a dusty hat, and simple clothes that showed years of hard labor. Every morning, before the heat of the day arrived, he walked across his land to check his cattle, repair broken fences, and make sure everything was safe. That morning felt different to him. As he stepped outside his small wooden house, he paused for a moment. The air felt heavier than usual. The animals were unusually still, and even the birds seemed quieter. Samuel did not know why, but his heart felt uneasy. He picked up his long walking stick and began his usual route. His boots made soft crunching sounds on the dry ground as he moved forward. He passed by his cattle, who were slowly grazing near a small water stream. They looked calm, but Samuel still felt something was not right. As he walked further, he noticed strange marks in the dirt. They looked like footprints mixed with drag marks, as if something had been pulled across the ground. Samuel stopped and bent down to look closer. He touched the dirt with his fingers, feeling how freshly disturbed it was. He stood up and looked around carefully. The land ahead sloped downward into a shallow ravine filled with bushes and fallen branches. Normally, he avoided that area because it was difficult to walk through. But that day, his curiosity and concern pushed him forward. Slowly, he followed the trail of broken twigs and bent grass. The deeper he went, the more disturbed the land appeared. Branches were snapped, and some bushes looked as if something had crashed through them. Then, through the thick leaves, he saw something that made his heart race. Hanging from a large fallen tree, he spotted figures moving slightly in the wind. At first, he could not believe his eyes. As he moved closer, his breath caught in his throat. There, tied by their legs with rough ropes, were 6 young Apache girls. They were hanging upside down from the thick branch of the fallen tree. Their long, dark hair hung toward the ground, brushing against the leaves below. Their hands were weakly reaching toward the earth, as if trying to find something to hold on to. Samuel felt his stomach twist in shock and fear. He froze for a moment, staring in disbelief. He had seen many harsh things in his life, but nothing like this. The girls looked pale and tired. Their clothes were dirty and torn from struggle. Their faces showed fear, confusion, and exhaustion. Some of them had their eyes closed, while others stared blankly at the ground below. For a few seconds, Samuel felt rooted in place, unable to move. His heart pounded loudly in his chest. Then, his shock turned into urgency. Without wasting another moment, he rushed forward. His boots slid slightly on the loose dirt as he climbed down into the ravine. He reached the tree and looked up at the girls, his hands trembling. He could see that the ropes were tightly wrapped around their ankles, holding them in place. The knots looked rough and cruel, tied by someone who did not care if the girls were hurt. Samuel quickly reached for his pocket and pulled out a small knife he always carried. His hand shook as he lifted it toward the rope of the nearest girl. He whispered softly, "Hold on, I'm here! You are safe now!" The girl's eyes flickered open. She looked at him with fear and confusion, but also a faint glimmer of hope. Carefully, Samuel pressed the knife against the rope and began cutting. The thick fibers were tough, and it took several tense seconds before they finally snapped. As soon as the rope loosened, he gently caught the girl in his arms and lowered her to the ground.
She was light, weak, and trembling.
He laid her softly on the grass and checked her breathing.
It was slow but steady. Without stopping, he moved to the next girl. One by one, he cut each rope and lowered them down. Some of the girls were conscious, while others seemed half awake, too exhausted to fully understand what was happening. By the time he reached the last girl, sweat covered his forehead and his arms ached from the effort, but he did not slow down. His only thought was to save them. Once all Sea girls were on the ground, Samuel knelt beside them. He could see they were scared and weak, but alive. That realization filled him with both relief and anger toward whoever had done this. He quickly removed his coat and gently placed it over the smallest girl to keep her warm. Then, he took his water bottle and carefully brought it to their lips, letting them drink little by little. The girls looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. They did not speak his language well, but they seemed to understand that he meant no harm. As they rested, Samuel noticed something important. On their arms, faces, and hands were beautiful traditional tattoos. The dark blue patterns were intricate and meaningful, representing their Apache heritage and family ties. He studied the markings carefully, realizing they were not random. Each symbol told a story of their people, their culture, and their identity. While watching over them, Samuel's mind raced with questions. Who had brought them here? Why were they left like this? And how long had they been hanging there before he arrived? The wind gently moved through the trees, making the leaves rustle softly. The once silent ravine now felt filled with fragile life and hope. Samuel knew one thing for sure. These girls would not be abandoned again. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, its warm light touched their faces, slowly bringing color back to their pale skin. And for the first time since he found them, Samuel felt a small sense of peace, knowing that he had arrived just in time. The girls lay quietly on the soft grass of the ravine. The morning light slowly grew brighter, shining through the tree branches and touching their tired faces. Some of them shivered slightly from the cold air, while others breathed slowly, still weak from what they had been through. The sound of wind moving through the leaves mixed with the gentle rustling of grass around them. Samuel stayed close, kneeling beside them, watching every small movement. His heart still beat fast, but his hands were steadier now. He felt responsible for these 6 young lives, even though he had just met them. In his mind, there was no question. He had to protect them. He reached into his small leather bag and pulled out another water bottle. This one was fresh and cool, taken from the spring near his ranch. Slowly he moved from one girl to the next, gently lifting their heads and letting them take small sips. He spoke softly, even though he knew they might not fully understand his words. Easy! Slow! You are safe now! He whispered again and again. One of the older girls opened her eyes fully for the first time. Her dark eyes were filled with fear, but also confusion. She looked around, trying to understand where she was and how she got there. When her eyes met Samuel's, she flinched slightly, but then relaxed when she saw his calm expression. Another girl coughed weakly, her chest rising and falling unevenly. Samuel placed his hand lightly on her back to help her breathe better. He could feel how fragile she was beneath his touch. As they began to drink more, their strength slowly returned. Their skin, which had been pale and cold, started to warm up. Their trembling lessened, and their breathing became steadier. The worst danger had passed, but they were far from fully safe. Samuel looked around the ravine carefully. He studied the rope still hanging from the tree, the disturbed ground, and the broken branches. Every detail made his anger grow stronger. Whoever had done this was cruel and careless, leaving these children to suffer alone in a hidden place. His eyes then returned to the girls. Up close, he noticed their traditional Apache clothing. Even though it was dirty and torn, he could still see the beauty in the patterns and colors. Small beads were sewn into the fabric, forming simple but meaningful designs. Some beads had fallen off and lay scattered in the grass around them. But what caught his attention the most were their tattoos. On their arms, hands, and sometimes on their cheeks were deep blue markings. They were not random lines. They formed shapes, symbols, and patterns that carried meaning in Apache culture. Samuel had seen similar markings before, but never so clearly or so close. He leaned slightly forward to look more carefully, but he made sure not to invade their space. He knew these tattoos were personal and sacred to their people. The patterns seemed to tell a story. Some symbols looked like mountains, others like rivers or animals. He realized that these markings were likely connected to their family, their clan, and their place in the tribe. One of the younger girls noticed him looking at her arm. She pulled it slightly toward her chest, her eyes showing both fear and protectiveness. Samuel immediately looked away and spoke gently to reassure her. "It's okay. I won't hurt you," he said in a calm voice. She relaxed just a little, but still kept her arm close. Samuel understood that these girls did not trust him yet, and he could not blame them. They had been left helpless, hanging upside down in a lonely ravine. Whoever did that must have terrified them deeply. After making sure they had enough water, Samuel stood up and walked back toward his horse and small wagon, which he had left near the edge of the ravine. The horse stood quietly, sensing the seriousness of the situation. Its ears twitched as Samuel approached. He reached into the back of the wagon and pulled out thick blankets. They were not new, but they were warm and clean. He carefully carried them back to where the girls were resting. One by one, he gently covered them with the blankets. The smallest girl curled slightly beneath it, pulling the fabric close around her body. Another girl closed her eyes, seeming to feel a bit safer now. As he worked, Samuel's mind raced with thoughts. He knew he could not leave them here. They needed proper care, food, and most importantly, to be returned to their families. But first, he needed to move them safely. He walked back to his wagon again and checked that it was sturdy and ready. He adjusted the wooden sides and laid more blankets inside so the girls would be comfortable. Then he led his horse closer to the ravine. Slowly and carefully he began helping the girls into the wagon. He started with the weakest one. He lifted her gently in his arms, holding her close but respectful. She was light, almost too light for her age. Her body trembled slightly as he carried her. When he placed her in the wagon, he arranged the blankets around her so she could rest comfortably. She looked up at him with tired eyes but did not resist. Next, he helped another girl, and then another. Some were able to sit up on their own, while others needed more support. Samuel moved patiently, never rushing, always speaking softly to keep them calm. By the time all 6 girls were in the wagon, they sat close together, wrapped in blankets. They looked like a small group of lost birds, huddled for warmth and safety. Samuel climbed up to the front of the wagon and took hold of the reins. He looked back at them one last time before starting his journey. They watched him quietly, their expressions still filled with uncertainty. With a gentle flick of the reins, the horse began to move. The wagon rolled slowly across the uneven ground, creaking softly as it went. The girls swayed gently with the motion, some of them closing their eyes as exhaustion finally took over. As they traveled, Samuel kept a steady pace. He did not rush, knowing that sudden movements could make the girls feel more afraid or unwell. The morning sun now shone brightly, warming the land around them. Dust rose slightly behind the wagon wheels as they moved along the rough path toward the nearest Apache settlement. Samuel had visited that area before to trade goods, so he knew the way. Along the journey, he glanced back several times to make sure the girls were still okay. Each time, he felt a mixture of sadness and determination. Sadness for what they had endured, and determination to see them safely home. At one point, one of the older girls pointed weakly toward the distance and spoke a few words in her language. Samuel did not fully understand, but he could sense that she recognized something familiar. He nodded gently and replied, "Yes, we are going there." The wind moved through the open land, carrying the scent of dry earth and wild plants. Birds flew overhead, their shadows passing over the wagon for a brief moment. As they continued, Samuel thought about the tattoos again. He realized how important they were. They were not just marks on skin. They were a connection to family, history, and identity. In a way, those symbols had guided him toward understanding who these girls were and where they belonged. After some time, the outline of small huts and smoke rising from fires appeared in the distance. The Apache settlement slowly came into view. People moved around, going about their daily lives, unaware of what had happened to 6 of their young members. Samuel felt his chest tighten slightly. He knew that when they arrived there would be shock, fear, and tears, but there would also be relief and gratitude. The wagon moved closer, and the girls began to stir. Some sat up straighter, recognizing their home. One of them let out a soft, shaky breath as if she had been holding it for a long time. Samuel slowed the horse to a gentle stop near the edge of the settlement. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then people began to notice the wagon. Men, women, and children turned their heads. A few started walking closer, their expressions curious and confused. Some elders squinted their eyes, trying to see clearly what was happening. Samuel took a deep breath, preparing himself for what would come next. Behind him, the 6 Apache girls sat together, wrapped in blankets, still weak, but no longer abandoned, no longer alone. They were finally on the path back to their people. The wagon came to a slow stop at the edge of the Apache settlement. Dust still floated gently in the air behind the wheels, glowing in the bright morning sunlight. The horse shifted its weight and let out a soft breath, as if it too understood the importance of this moment. For a few seconds, everything felt still. Then the quiet broke. A young boy was the first to notice the wagon properly. He pointed and called out something in his language, his voice high and filled with surprise. Several people turned their heads. Women carrying baskets, men preparing tools, and elders sitting near small fires all looked towards Samuel and the 6 girls. Slowly, more people began to walk closer. At first, their faces showed confusion. They did not recognize Samuel clearly, and they did not understand why he had brought a wagon toward their land. But as they came nearer, their expressions changed. One woman gasped and covered her mouth. Another man stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening. They could now see the girls clearly, wrapped in blankets, sitting close together in the back of the wagon, tired, quiet, and fragile. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people whispered in shock, while others spoke quickly in worried tones. A few elders stood up slowly, leaning on their walking sticks as they moved forward. Samuel remained seated at the front of the wagon, holding the reins loosely. He kept his face calm, but inside his chest felt heavy. He knew that this moment would be emotional, and he did not want to say or do anything wrong. The crowd gathered closer. An older Apache man with long gray hair and deep lines on his face stepped forward. His eyes were sharp, and his posture was straight despite his age. He looked at the girls carefully, one by one, without speaking at first. Then his gaze moved to Samuel. Samuel gently placed his hands on his knees and nodded respectfully. He did not try to speak loudly or take control of the situation. He simply waited. A younger Apache woman, likely a mother, pushed her way through the crowd. Her eyes searched the wagon desperately. When she spotted one of the girls, she let out a trembling cry and rushed forward. "Lena!" she called out in her language. The girl lifted her head slowly. Her tired eyes widened slightly when she saw the woman. For a brief moment, her face showed pure disbelief. Then she whispered something softly and reached her arms forward. Samuel carefully stepped down from the wagon and moved aside to give them space. The woman climbed up onto the wagon without hesitation and wrapped her arms around the girl tightly, tears streaming down her face. The crowd gasped softly, some people crying openly, others bowing their heads in relief.
One by one, more family members began recognizing the other girls.
A tall man ran forward and climbed up beside another girl, pulling her close to his chest. An elderly woman touched the face of one of the younger girls, whispering gentle words and brushing her hair back tenderly. The settlement filled with emotion, cries of relief, soft prayers, and shaken breaths. Samuel stood quietly near the wagon, watching with a heavy but grateful heart. He did not feel like a hero. He simply felt grateful that he had arrived in time. After the first wave of reunions, the elders turned their attention back to Samuel. The older Apache man who had stepped forward earlier approached him slowly. He looked directly into Samuel's eyes, his expression serious but not angry. Another man stood beside him, acting as a translator. "You found them?" the elder asked through the translator. Samuel nodded.
"Yes, in a ravine not far from my land." The elder's eyes darkened slightly at this.
"How were they?" Samuel hesitated for a moment, then answered honestly. "Weak, cold, hanging from a fallen tree, tied by their legs." A deep murmur of anger and sorrow spread through the crowd. Several people looked toward the ground in pain. The elder closed his eyes briefly as if saying a silent prayer. Then his gaze softened again as he looked at the girls. While this happened, some women from the tribe began climbing into the wagon to help the girls down. They moved gently, speaking softly in their language, wrapping the children in warmer blankets and guiding them carefully onto the ground. As they did, Samuel noticed something again: the tattoos. Up close now, with the girls surrounded by their people, the markings seemed even more meaningful. The elders leaned in slightly, studying the symbols on their arms and faces. One elder pointed to a specific pattern on one girl's forearm. He spoke quietly, and the translator explained, "This mark shows her family line. It connects her to this clan." Another elder examined the tattoo on a different girl's cheek. His expression shifted from worry to understanding. "This symbol belongs to the mountain people," he said. "We know her family." Samuel watched closely, realizing how deeply these tattoos were woven into their identity. They were not just decoration. They were proof of who these girls were, where they came from, and who they belonged to. One of the elders turned back to Samuel. "These marks helped you?" he asked. Samuel nodded slowly. "They helped me understand they belong to your people. I have seen similar tattoos before when I traded near your land." The elder studied him for a long moment. Then he gave a small nod of respect. "You paid attention." "That is rare." Meanwhile, some of the girls began to speak quietly to their families. Their voices were soft and shaky, but filled with relief. They pointed toward the direction of the ravine, explaining in broken words what had happened to them. Their parents listened with pain in their eyes. One father clenched his fists tightly, his face tense with anger. A mother rocked her child gently, whispering comforting words and pressing her forehead against hers. The elders gathered in a small circle, speaking among themselves. Their expressions were serious. It was clear they were already thinking about what had happened and what must be done next. Samuel stood a little distance away, feeling slightly out of place but still deeply connected to what was happening. He watched as the girls were carried gently toward one of the larger huts, where healers and older women were waiting to care for them. Before leaving, one of the older girls turned back toward Samuel. She walked slowly toward him, supported by her mother. Her steps were unsteady, but her eyes were clear. She stopped in front of him and looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she reached out and gently touched his hand. She said something softly in her language. The translator stepped forward and explained, "She says, 'Thank you. You saved her life.'" Samuel felt his throat tighten. He nodded, unable to find words. He gently squeezed her hand and then released it. The girl gave a small, weak smile before turning back to her family. As the crowd slowly began to move away, taking the girls to safety, the elder approached Samuel one more time. He placed his hand over his heart in a traditional sign of respect. "You brought them back," he said through the translator. "You did not ignore them. You did not leave them." Samuel bowed his head slightly. "Anyone should have done the same." The elder studied him again, then spoke firmly. "Not everyone would." As the sun climbed higher, the settlement returned to a quieter state, though the mood was now filled with gratitude and tension. Gratitude that the girls were alive. Tension because whoever had harmed them was still unknown. Samuel walked back toward his wagon and climbed up to the front seat. He looked toward the ravine in the distance, feeling a mix of anger and determination. Behind him, the Apache people began preparing food, warm drinks, and herbal care for the girls. Healers lit small fires and sang soft chants meant to bring comfort and strength. The elders continued to study the tattoos in their minds, connecting families, tracing lines, and confirming identities. In many ways, those markings had become the key to understanding everything: who the girls were, where they belonged, and how deeply rooted they were in their culture. Before Samuel began his journey back home, one of the younger men from the tribe approached him with a small bundle of dried food and a bottle of water. "For your travel," the man said simply. Samuel accepted it with gratitude. As he guided his horse and wagon away from the settlement, he glanced back one last time. He saw families sitting together, holding their children close, and elders standing tall, watching over them. The 6 Apache girls were no longer alone. They were back where they belonged, surrounded by love, tradition, and protection. And as the wagon rolled slowly across the dusty land, Samuel carried with him not just the memory of what he had seen, but a deeper understanding of a people whose strength, culture, and unity had touched his heart. The Apache settlement did not return to normal after the wagon rolled away. Even though the sun was bright and the land looked peaceful, something heavy rested in the hearts of the people. The 6 girls were safe, but what had happened to them could not be forgotten. Inside the largest hut, the girls lay on soft animal skins near a warm fire. The flames crackled gently, sending small sparks upward and filling the air with the smell of burning wood and healing herbs. Older women sat around them, humming low songs that had been passed down through many generations. Their voices were calm and steady, meant to soothe fear and bring strength back into tired bodies. Each girl was wrapped in clean blankets. Their torn clothes had been carefully removed and replaced with soft woven garments. Their hair was washed slowly and braided again as a sign that they were back under the care of their people. One of the healers pressed warm herbal compresses against their ankles where the ropes had been tied. She worked gently, speaking in a soft voice that carried kindness and patience. Another healer prepared a warm drink made from roots and leaves that were known to help the body recover from shock and exhaustion. Outside the hut, families gathered quietly. Some parents held each other tightly, still shaken by how close they had come to losing their children. Others stared toward the horizon, their faces filled with anger and determination. The elders sat together in a small circle near a sacred fire. Their expressions were serious. The oldest among them, a man with deep lines in his face and long silver hair, spoke slowly and carefully. His voice was low, but every word carried weight. "This was not an accident," he said. The others nodded in agreement. They all understood that the girls had been taken deliberately and left in a hidden place where few people would pass by. Whoever had done this had not wanted them to be found. One elder placed his hand over his heart and spoke in a firm tone. "We must learn who did this, not for revenge, but for protection. If we do not act, our children will never be safe." A younger man, strong and tall, clenched his fists. "We should search the land. Follow the trail. Look for any signs." The elders agreed. Soon a group of skilled Apache trackers was chosen. These men had spent their entire lives learning how to read the land, how to see footprints in dust, broken branches, disturbed grass, and signs that others would miss. They prepared their bows, knives, and supplies, but their faces remained calm and focused. Before they left, they went inside the hut to see the girls one last time. The oldest tracker knelt beside the smallest girl. She was asleep now, her breathing slow and steady. He gently placed his hand near her head, not touching her, and whispered a quiet blessing. "We will make sure this never happens again," he said softly. Outside, the trackers began their journey. They moved silently across the land, following the same path Samuel had taken earlier. Their eyes were sharp, scanning every detail. They noticed the disturbed ground near the ravine, broken branches, and faint marks where something heavy had been dragged. One tracker pointed toward a set of footprints that did not belong to Apache people. The prints were deeper, wider, and shaped differently. The group exchanged serious glances. "They were not alone," another tracker said quietly. They followed the trail carefully, step by step, moving deeper into the wild land. Every sign they found made it clearer that the girls had been moved by others and left there intentionally. Back in the settlement, life slowly continued, but with a new sense of caution. Women worked together to prepare food for the girls and their families. They cooked warm stew, baked bread, and gathered fresh water. Children were kept close, no longer allowed to wander far from the village without adults nearby. Meanwhile, inside the healing hut, the girls began to wake one by one. The oldest girl, who had first recognized her mother, opened her eyes and looked around. She saw familiar faces and felt a small sense of safety return to her heart. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand gently. "You are home," her mother whispered. The girl nodded slowly. Her voice was weak, but she managed to speak. She began to describe what she remembered. Walking near the edge of the land, strangers appearing suddenly, confusion, fear, and then darkness. Her words made the women listening tighten their grip on their shawls. The story was painful, but important. Another girl spoke next. She described hearing voices, feeling lifted, and then waking up hanging upside down. She shivered at the memory, and one of the elders placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. As the girls shared their experiences, the elders listened carefully. They were not just hearing their pain, they were gathering information that might help identify those responsible. Later that afternoon, Samuel returned. He did not come in his wagon this time. Instead, he arrived on his horse, carrying supplies and medicine he had gathered from his own home. As he approached, some of the Apache men stepped forward, watching him closely. But the elder who had spoken to him earlier raised his hand. "Let him pass," he said. Samuel dismounted slowly and bowed his head slightly in respect. He looked tired, but his eyes were still filled with concern. "I brought what I could," he said, holding out small bundles of dried food, clean cloth, and a few bottles of simple medicine. The elder accepted them with a nod. "Your kindness continues." Samuel glanced toward the healing hut. "How are they?" "They are resting," the elder replied. "They are safe. That is because of you." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone should do." One of the younger Apache men stepped forward, still carrying tension in his posture. He looked at Samuel carefully, not with anger, but with deep curiosity. "Why did you help them?" he asked. Samuel thought for a moment before answering.
Because they were children. Because they were helpless.
"Because leaving them would have been wrong." The man studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. His expression softened. Inside the hut, one of the girls heard Samuel's voice outside. She turned her head slightly and spoke to her mother, pointing toward the entrance. Her mother stood up and walked outside. When she saw Samuel, she approached him slowly. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. She placed both hands over her heart and bowed her head deeply. "Thank you," she said through the translator, who stood nearby. Samuel felt his chest tighten again. He bowed his head in return, deeply moved. As evening approached, the settlement gathered for a quiet ceremony around the sacred fire. The girls were brought out gently, supported by their families. They sat close together, wrapped in blankets, their faces still pale but calmer than before. The elders began to sing a slow, powerful song. The rhythm of drums filled the air, steady like a heartbeat. Smoke from the fire rose toward the darkening sky, carrying prayers for protection, healing, and strength. Samuel stood at the edge of the gathering, watching respectfully. He did not join the circle, but he did not feel like an outsider anymore. He felt connected to what was happening, even if he did not fully understand every tradition. One of the elders approached him and handed him a small, carved wooden token. It was simple, but beautifully shaped, with symbols engraved into its surface. "This is a sign of our respect," the elder explained. "You showed care where others showed cruelty." Samuel accepted it carefully, feeling its smooth surface in his hand. He did not take it lightly. He knew it meant more than just thanks. It meant trust. As night fell, stars began to appear across the sky. The girls slowly grew stronger, supported by their families and community. Laughter returned in small moments mixed with tears as they hugged their parents and siblings. Far away, the Apache trackers continued their search through the darkness, moving with patience and skill. They were closer now, following clearer signs that led toward a distant trail. Back in the settlement, the fire burned brightly, lighting the faces of the people gathered around it. The Sikhs girls were no longer alone, no longer abandoned, no longer forgotten. They were surrounded by love, protection, and a people determined to keep them safe. And as Samuel prepared to return to his ranch for the night, he looked back one last time at the glowing fire and the strong, united Apache community around it. He knew that this day had changed him forever. Not just because of what he had seen, but because of the bond that had been quietly formed between him and the people he had helped. The wind moved gently across the land, carrying the sound of drums and singing into the open night. Somewhere beyond the hills, danger might still exist. But here, in this moment, there was healing, unity, and the unbreakable strength of a community that refused to let harm win. Night slowly passed over the Apache settlement. The sacred fire burned low, its glowing embers lighting the dark faces of the people who sat nearby. Some families slept quietly in their huts, holding their children close. Others stayed awake, watching over the village with calm but serious expressions. Inside the healing hut, the 6 girls rested peacefully. Their breathing was steady, and their faces looked more relaxed than they had since they were found. The warm fire, soft blankets, and gentle songs from the elders had helped them feel safe again. One of the healers sat near the entrance, listening carefully to the sounds outside. She could hear the soft wind moving through the trees and the distant howl of an animal far away. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer for protection over the girls and their people. As dawn approached, the sky slowly turned from deep black to dark blue. The first light of morning touched the land gently, waking the birds and bringing life back to the open fields. At the edge of the settlement, the Apache trackers returned. They moved silently through the tall grass, their faces serious and tired. Their clothes were dusty and their bodies showed signs of a long night of travel. But their eyes were sharp, filled with purpose. The elders immediately gathered around them near the sacred fire. The oldest tracker stepped forward and placed a small bundle of objects on the ground. Broken rope, pieces of torn cloth, and a few unfamiliar items that did not belong to the Apache people. "We followed the trail," he said in a calm but firm voice. "It led far beyond our land, toward the old trade route near the river." Another tracker pointed to the broken rope. "This is the same type used on the girls." The elders exchanged serious glances. They understood clearly. Whoever had done this had traveled through their land and then returned toward the trade route, likely trying to disappear among other travelers. One elder spoke slowly. "We will not rush, but we will not forget. Justice will come in the right way." Back inside the hut, the girls began to wake. The smallest girl opened her eyes and looked around. For a moment she seemed confused. Then she saw her mother sitting beside her, smiling gently. The girl's face softened and she reached out her small hand. Her mother took it immediately. "You are safe," she whispered. One by one, the other girls stirred. Some stretched weakly, while others simply lay still, absorbing the warmth and comfort around them. Their strength was slowly returning, but they were still fragile. The healers brought warm food and drink to them. A simple soup made from roots, herbs, and soft grains filled the air with a comforting smell. The girls ate slowly, their hands trembling slightly, but each bite gave them more energy. Outside, the settlement slowly came to life again. Women prepared meals, men checked tools and horses, and children stayed close to their parents. The mood was calmer than the day before, but still filled with careful awareness. Samuel returned that morning as well. He arrived quietly, riding his horse at a slow pace. This time he carried a small bundle of fresh supplies, clean cloth, extra blankets, and more water from his spring. As he approached, some Apache men stepped forward again, but their expressions were no longer suspicious. They nodded to him respectfully and allowed him to enter the village. The elder who had given him the carved wooden token came to greet him. "You came back," the elder said simply. Samuel nodded. "I wanted to see that they were well." The elder's face softened. "They are stronger today. Your help did not end yesterday." Samuel felt a small sense of relief. Inside the hut, the girls noticed his voice again. One of them pointed toward the entrance, and her mother helped her sit up. Samuel was invited inside, something that showed deep trust. He entered slowly, careful not to disturb the peaceful atmosphere. The girls looked at him with calmer eyes now. Fear had been replaced with recognition. The oldest girl, who had thanked him before, smiled weakly and nodded toward him. Samuel returned the gesture with a gentle nod of his own. One of the elders spoke quietly. "They remember you as the man who helped them." Samuel felt his chest tighten with emotion. He did not say much, but his silence carried deep respect. Later that day, the tribe gathered again near the sacred fire. This time, the ceremony was different. Instead of being filled with pain and worry, it carried a sense of healing and unity. The 6 girls were brought forward, supported by their families. They sat in a small circle wrapped in warm blankets, their faces brighter than before. The elders stood around them and began a slow, rhythmic chant. The sound of drums echoed softly across the land, steady and powerful. The smoke from the fire rose toward the sky, carrying prayers for strength, protection, and guidance. One by one, the elders placed their hands gently over the girls' heads, offering blessings in their ancient language. They spoke of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable bond of their people. The girls closed their eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire and the love of their community surrounding them. Samuel stood at the edge of the gathering again, watching quietly. He felt honored to witness such a sacred moment, even though he was not part of the tribe. As the ceremony ended, one of the elders approached him. "We will search again," the elder said. "Not in anger, but with wisdom. Those who did this will be known," Samuel nodded. "I will watch my land as well. If I see anything unusual, I will come to you." The elder placed his hand over his heart. "That is all we can ask." Days passed. The girls grew stronger each morning. Their laughter slowly returned, small at first, then brighter. They began to walk again, moving carefully but steadily around the village. Their families never left them alone. Mothers, fathers, and older siblings stayed close, telling stories, singing songs, and reminding them that they were loved and protected. The tattoos on their arms and faces became even more meaningful during this time. Elders explained their symbols again, reminding the girls of their identity, their history, and their place within the tribe. The markings were not just signs of culture, they were reminders of belonging and survival. Meanwhile, the trackers continued their search. They followed new trails, spoke with nearby travelers, and gathered information carefully. They did not act with haste or violence. Instead, they moved with patience and purpose, guided by their traditions and respect for life. Weeks later, word reached the settlement that a small group of dangerous travelers had been questioned near the river trade route. Their belongings matched the broken rope and unfamiliar items found near the ravine. The Apache elders chose not to take matters into their own hands. Instead, they worked with nearby authorities and other tribes to ensure that the situation was handled fairly and safely. Their goal was not revenge. It was to prevent harm from happening again. Back in the settlement, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. The 6 girls played near their homes, their voices echoing across the land. They still carried memories of what happened, but they were no longer controlled by fear. One evening, as the sun set in deep shades of orange and red, Samuel prepared to leave the settlement for the last time. His horse stood quietly beside him, and his wagon was packed with supplies. The carved wooden token hung safely around his neck. Before he left, the families of the 6 girls gathered around him. One mother stepped forward and placed a simple woven bracelet in his hand. "For your kindness," she said. Another father clasped his forearm in a sign of respect. The oldest girl walked toward him slowly. She was stronger now, standing without support. She looked up at him and smiled warmly. "Thank you," she said softly in his language this time. Samuel knelt slightly so he was at her level. "You are brave," he replied gently. The elder approached one last time. "You will always be welcome here," he said. Samuel bowed his head deeply. "And I will always remember your people." As he climbed onto his horse and began his journey back toward his ranch, he looked back over his shoulder. The Apache settlement stood strong against the wide open land. Smoke rose gently from fires, children played near their homes, and elders watched over everything with calm wisdom. The 6 girls stood together near the sacred fire, wrapped in blankets, surrounded by their families. They had survived. They had been rescued. They had healed. And they were never alone again. As Samuel rode away, the wind carried the distant sound of singing across the fields. It was a song of strength, unity, and hope. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, compassion and courage could bring light. Far beyond the hills, the land stretched endlessly. But in Samuel's heart, one truth remained clear. Saving those 6 Apache girls had not only changed their lives, it had changed his as well.